Hi everyone, Charles from the Food People here. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. And it's my pleasure to welcome Mark Parr, aka Lord Logs, or the Wood Whisperer, from the London Log Company, supplier of wood and charcoal products for open fire cooking to chefs across the UK and beyond, including the likes of Thomas Parry from Brat. Welcome, Mark, and thank you for joining me today as part of the Food People in Conversation With. At the Food People, we're very clear about why we do what we do. We're champions of change, driven every day by our intent to shift the future of food and drink by harnessing the power of trends. And this In Conversation With series is all about talking to other people, businesses, brands, entrepreneurs, personalities to find out more about why they do what they do. How in their way are they championing change and shifting the future of food and drink? So welcome, Mark. It's brilliant to be talking to you today.
Thank you, Charles. Hello, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, very good indeed. And I wonder
Good.
if you could just start by, for those people that aren't familiar with London Log Co., just a bit of tell everyone a little bit about what you do and what London Log Co. does.
Okay, so fundamentally, we source and distribute charcoals and woods for chefs, much like a chef would use a fishmonger for fish and vegetables, for things like that. We do exactly the same with wood and charcoal, but we also are on a mission to share skills and share knowledge across the board. So we've become a kind of a boutique, a library of information and ideas and conversation. And we've watched something start from really small and cult to become much more ubiquitous and become culture. And that was, I always had an aspiration for that and a hope, not for me personally, though I was happy to stand out front and, mouth the words for it. I just wanted this way of cooking to have an audience and have a flow of information that could be exchanged and become a community. And after 8 to 10 years, I was sitting writing points on this earlier. It really has become that. And so it's great to be part of it and to have had a marked effect, if that's the case. We've been very lucky. I mean, I sometimes think that we were in a sort of, a category of one at one point. So no one else had anyone else to really talk to, but it's grown so much. There's young chefs now who don't remember what it was like before, when there wasn't that much fire cooking. They just think it's completely normal. And I love that. For me, that's part of my purpose achieved, but we have a lot more to do, and it's grown bigger. So there's much more, conversation going on. So
when you first started, and you talk about sort of 8 to 10 years ago, what, if you were to kind of chart that journey, how has it shifted and changed? I know we've probably been talking about fire cooking for not quite that long, but yeah, for a good few years. But yeah, how would you kind of summarize that journey from where it was to where it is now?
Well, I started the business 20 years ago, and predominantly we were just a wood merchant, but I'm a huge cooking enthusiast, and I had dreams of working behind the irons myself, and I realized that early on, when I first got involved with some of the sort of smaller restaurants that were making really interesting sounds. I think it was at that point where we came out of the last recession. It was kind of the end of fine dining. People like Tom Adams at PICU were young. They didn't have the fear of reputation. They just had something to do and get on with.
Yeah. And
I became, I luckily joined in with those guys. They created just amazing food. And when you look back now, they had a pedigree, but they applied it to a way of cooking that fire cooking's never died off. It's culturally been there in lots of countries, but in London particularly, it wasn't at the forefront of what chefs were doing. We were still not stuck, but we were still part of the French model. Yeah. And kitchens were very formalized. And if you wanted to eat something cooked on fire, you'd go to a Turkish restaurant and eat at a mangal. And so people kind of understood some of it. Yeah. But when it started to cross over into food that was just super interesting, but it really had a reference to history as well. Some of Tom's dishes. And you had restaurants like the Hawksmoor, who held the vanguard for, a bigger, more consistent company that was delivering fantastic British steaks. You know, it was a take on an American style steakhouse, but in a very British manner, using real fire to cook on. And that was their thing. And as it turned out, you know, Hawksmoor and people involved in it had a very strong hand in PICU. And so it was the sort of, it was this first spark, I suppose, if you're going to use a fire reference, of a new revolution.
Yeah.
And you know what? We were having a really good time. And that was, we weren't going to fine dining restaurants. They were like things that other people went to.
Yeah.
And that separation, but was obvious. Yeah. Restaurants were also were sort of big occasion places. It's a different culture now. People go out to eat socially.
Yeah.
And what I mean socially, it's not just for business. No one else is paying your bill. Those days, and I suppose it was also the early days of street food.
Yeah.
And you could go into a street food stall and somebody would be cooking one thing, but really, really, really well.
Yeah.
And you didn't care that you stood in a brickyard with a paper tray to eat it out of.
Yeah.
You might be eating a 45-day aged steak cooked, you know, over wood fire. And I think it was that honing in on these awesome ingredients. There was that, I think that revolution was really, it cut away all the sort of tablecloths, all the fancy accoutrements of a restaurant. And it said, this piece of beef is from this person. It's cooked on a fire and it's cooked like this, really. And the language and it was honest. Yeah. There was nobody putting it into a timbale or anything like that, you know. Yeah. And I think people just recognized it, and it became that ingredients and provenance directed food. But it came out of people eating it on the street or eating it in a small restaurant that had 20 seats maximum in it. And it became a cult, because once you started like that, you couldn't go back. It was an irreversible position. There was no way that was going backwards. It was only going to go forwards. And so we found ourselves at the sort of like, you know, the sort of early embers of that revolution. And it just happened that then another chef would open a restaurant, and they'd worked maybe at St. John. They wanted to put a grill in. And so we just rolled along with that whole momentum, and we just grew exponentially. I mean, I had another job at the time, and I worked in design, and I worked on sites, you know, installing very nice furniture and things like that. And I was running around in between until in the end I got to the point I just said, I have to make a choice, you know. Yeah. And so I started full-time processing, preparing, selling charcoal. And charcoal was the first thing, really.
Yeah.
And then charcoal seemed to, this is like one of those self-defeating positions, but charcoal seemed too prescriptive at that point, because I thought we were missing a whole bunch of things. So I started going out searching for wood, and, you know, like Kent is full of fruit farms. So I started getting apple wood and started things like that. And at the same time, people like Dave Pint were doing burnt ends up at Climpson's Arch. And now if you go back in the sort of history of the revolution, as it were, this evolution of food and cooking has started in places like that, like Climpson's, PICU. They were all the sort of germination places. We started to add wood into the mix. And once I started to add wood into the mix and make it more, I was trying, my aim was to have wood as an ingredient, because for me it was really simple. You know, if you explain to someone I'm going to cook a pork chop over apple wood, that you don't really need to say too much more.
No.
There's no fancy menu for that. It just said, you could see that and you would point, and I'd just say, I'm going to have that. That's it. You know what's coming. Yeah. And I love that clarity. And it was just exciting, you know, just really exciting, and hunting down and searching out produce to get enough produce to put into the industry. Yeah. And then having people behind us, you know, people like Tom Adams just saying, bring stuff, let me see what your ideas are. Yeah. And having that palette that someone's got to be able to take your idea at some small part of it and drive a large part of their cooking from it and their reputation. And, you know, it's an amazing amount of trust, but at the time it just seemed so bloody exciting, you know. Yeah. And it still is. Yeah. And it genuinely still is. And so as that grew, we grew as a company. We were really lucky, I suppose, where people like the Hawksmoor just admired the drive that we had. And then Jamie Oliver's Barbacoa gave us a break, you know.
Yeah.
And that was like going to, fuel the Titanic at the time. We were just so like blown away about the volume that we would have to get. And it just made us get really serious about what we were doing, as in we really had to make sure we had our supply chain intact. And once we had that audience, I suppose we came at that perfect zenith as well, where social media was taking off. So there was all this like word of mouth, free media, blogging. I mean, we built the company up to plus £1 million without even ever having a website. Yeah. We just had free media. We were all at a very unique time where there was this sort of opportunity to grow and, and for people to be on board. And I suppose if we roll forward as we've gone through, we've gone from like Climpson's Arch, which is a great incubator for developing talent. Somsar started their Thai barbecue there. There's the guys from Smoking Goat who were over in Dean Street. Mm-hmm. There was a whole group of us who had kind of left real jobs and just said, no, we're going to do these things. And it just felt, it just felt fresh and, exciting and,
One of the things from my point of view that I really wanted to ask you is, and I've, obviously we've spoken before and I've had some little teasers to what this it could be, is why, what is it about wood? Is it sustainability? Is it the flavors that it brings, the fact that it's an ingredient? What is it? What's your kind of purpose and the principles? What are the things that get you really excited when it comes to wood and charcoal?
I think the interaction from forestry right through to the final dish is that you don't have to explain too much to people to capture their imagination, and to people to understand fundamentally that it's a bit like local produce. If you've got Romney Marsh lamb, you know where it's been and you know where it's coming to, you know what's happening to it. And it's like cooking with wood. There's a cooking with fire. You can't fake that. A lot of kitchens now obviously have these open kitchen. You can see the grill. It's great because it's that really honest relationship. But I think that goes so much back into history, that the idea of seeing your food being cooked, instead of the kitchen being locked away and you're in this sort of boutique room, which I still find challenging if I go to a restaurant. If I'm in a room and food comes out of a door and empty plates go in another door, I always feel there's something, I'm just missing part of the experience. That's my personal feeling. Yeah. But when you go to a restaurant where you can see flames licking up and you can see things happening, and there's a jeopardy there as well, isn't there? You have to trust somebody. And in a world that's so digitized and manipulated and edited, you just cannot fake taking something really good, cooking it where someone can see it and that going to your plate. And I think fundamentally it makes us feel really secure in a very big world, in a very big digitized world. It feels incredibly analog. Yeah. And I think that's nice, It's the acoustic guitar of cooking, isn't it?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And it's Nicholas Ekstedt has just written a new book, and I love Nicholas and we're friends. And like he's called it, I think the strap in it is like the analog Nordic kitchen. Yeah. And that is, everyone can relate to that. There's an integrity to cooking on fire that people trust and believe in.
Yeah. And do you think it takes diners and chefs back to a sort of a primeval, a kind of a basic sense of cooking and provision? The fact that it's perhaps a little bit more difficult to tame, and there's a real skill and a craft involved in it. Do you think that plays a part in this as well?
Yeah, communities were built on councils. The council of sitting around the fire. If you think about it fundamentally, it's probably the time when a group of people have to be the most cooperative for the greater good of everyone. And so somebody is elected or takes charge and other people help that service, and then everybody gets to share in the bounty and eat together. Yeah. And that feels very human, Yeah. And I think sometimes history feels like something that happened over there. Really, cooking on fire is part of our constant history. We just feel like it happened in books, and we look at prints and things like that. But if you go back, go to Hampton Court. Yeah. Hampton Court kitchen You know, you've got clockwork spit roasts, and you've got things that rotate, and it's fundamentally all there. So I look back, I mean, people, you know, to ask me, does it feel it doesn't feel unsophisticated when I look back. I look back and I think that is really clever, because it achieves all the things we're trying to achieve now.
Yeah.
But I think the fire cooking bit is, I think it's the part where people feel there's an honesty, and that's trust, and and that's where we become happy in our internal monologue, I think.
Where did things like hot topics like sustainability, you know, coming out from one perspective, you know, you're chopping down trees. So how does sustainability play within what you do, and how important is it for you?
Sustainability is essentially sensibility, because I have yet to meet a forester ever, and I've met a lot, and I've met some fairly left field, off-grid people. I've never met anybody who has even any suggestion of, like, while nobody's looking, let's cut this whole forest down. I've never known anyone like that.
Yeah.
I think what's happened now, which I'm grateful for, there's a lot more legislation, and there's a lot more compliance, and there's a lot more standards. The industry, in a way, it had got itself into a bit of a corner. All extraction was the same. You know, people were cooking on gas ranges and things like that, you know, stove tops and all that sort of thing. And you could take a steak and put it in a pan and make it hot and make it brown. But you would cut out a fundamental part of that dish's journey. Entrecôte bordelaise is a classic.
Yeah.
It should really be cooked over a fire, and it should be cooked over a fire of vine wood from Bordeaux.
Uh-huh.
That's what it should be cooked over. That's the recipe.
Yeah.
And the fire isn't there just as a heat source. The fire is there as an ingredient, because when you burn a vine that's had 40 years of vinous, you know, culture going through it, viticulture going through there, it's got 40 years of 40 summers of 40 years of mineral absorption. Yeah. That has become a thing. It becomes part of it's almost like capturing time. And when you burn it, it releases all those wonderful aromas, and that becomes part of the dish. And I think what happened was the classic cooking, cuisine-based, you know, kitchen design, kitchen installation, just didn't have in their head what putting a fire in the kitchen meant.
Yeah.
And so that has caught up. And especially in the last 3 or 4 years, you know, now we have water canopy wash extraction. Yeah. We've got this thing where we've got compliance, because we had to have, so all wood must be kiln dried, all charcoal must be tested to Section 22 of the Clean Air Act. Mm-hmm. And all these things are right and correct. The thing is that you were dealing with is people like myself coming into the industry, who were then dealing with people who were used to having a more craft approach to their supply chain. So it was based on human interaction and trust. But once we could find a way to calibrate, you know, measure moisture in wood, yeah. Then we started creating through heat asks, creating regulations. The supply chain has never been cleaner and never been better than it is now. Never, ever has it been better. And we lead the world as well in that. We're very, very advanced in that stage. So we've got some of the best extraction, we've got some of the best fuels, we've got some of the best testing, and we've got some of the best compliance. And that produces kitchens which are safe and creative to work in.
How do you go about your sourcing? What kind of, you know, principles do you operate when it comes to where your wood is coming from? You mentioned Kent earlier on, but from how far afield and how do you go about doing that?
So my thing is, I like to source where we can get the best of British. I'll find it. So fruit woods. It's really understanding as well. And this is the bit where the public in general and chefs, and it's become easier because the information is much more fluid, is understanding what forestry is about. So we have crop wood, plantation crop. So there are woods that we plant which are grown to be cut down. Mm-hmm. They're not part of an ancient woodland. They're not part of what would often be perceived as this beautiful landscape, although they are beautiful, you know, in their surroundings. So you have wood like silver birch, and you have wood like ash, and you have wood like, then we have oak and beech. They are grown on estates as a crop. They're grown to be cut down. And because what happens is as soon as they come down, the land's prepared, planting goes on, natural germination and seeding goes on, and so the cycle continues. It's part of an endless coppicing system that this country was huge for. And so the measure for that and the legislation for that is strong, and it has been for a long time. It's just that now people are more aware of, you know, if you go to a restaurant and they've got a pizza oven or a wood-fired oven, let's say, it's like, what are you burning? And so now it has to have ready-to-burn certification through HETAS, and that's only correct. Because what was happening is that if you were buying wood unwittingly or knowingly that wasn't dried correctly, you were causing more, you know, more creosote into the chimney. It makes it more dangerous. It makes it more volatile. So the other thing we try and do is look for, there's always natural byproducts of forestry or viticulture or fruit growing. Mm-hmm. I mean, we look at an orchard, and an orchard is such a romantic thing. It goes right back to the, you know, Adam and Eve, you know, they stood under the apple tree.
Yeah.
But the apple tree is a sort of contrivance anyway, a commercial apple. It has a commercial rootstock, which is, you know, a rust-free rootstock. Onto that, they graft a species. So it might be a particular type of apple. And then you grow them, and it gets much like a vineyard. They get clipped and primped and trimmed. And until that tree has its life cycle, it's extracted and replaced.
Yeah.
In the old days, which not so long ago, up until 5 years ago, the wood from the apple tree was just considered firewood, if that. If not, they just burnt the lot. It was just considered wasted byproduct. Now it's crop. So, and it's only crop because there's an industry that is allowed to burn that product in the restaurant industry and make good use of it. Yeah. And so when you go back and read sort of medieval recipes, like take the wood from the orchard, we can do that. Yeah. So we can recreate these wonderful dishes in an authentic way and have all these wonderful ingredients. The ingredient just happens to be something that burns and creates an aromatic. Yeah. So for us, it's an aromatic library. It's each wood, each species has a density, a lightness, you know, it operates on this sharp to dark aromatic spectrum. Yeah. And then we crop those and collect those. Same with in the vineyards, we collect when the vines, you know, when I first started going to Spain and searching out vineyards, I thought it was tragic that you go to Rioja and down near the river, they'd had a frost pocket and it had killed off, you know, 10 acres of a vineyard. But they were much more sanguine about it. They're like, hey, this is what happens. This is how it works. Yeah. But then we could then take a biodynamic vine and then turn that into a produce. Yeah. So it's a case of finding crop and byproducts which happen to be very close to things that we cherish. Yeah. So there's that relationship, because if they produce a good grape, there's a pretty good chance it's going to produce a really good aromatic. Yeah. And then like in Spain, we harvest, they harvest the wood from the holm oak tree, which 25% of Spain is covered in holm oak. On the border at Extremadura, of borders of Portugal, is the largest proliferation of holm oak trees in the world. Okay. So I've driven 800 kilometers and I've gone to sleep, woken up and still seeing holm oak. Yeah. And at the end of 800 kilometers, I can see holm oak. It's huge. The thing is they grow the holm oak to grow the acorns, to feed the pigs, to make pata negra. Yeah. So when they trim the trees, they don't cut the trees down. I asked them, do you ever cut the trees down? They just called me an idiot, which I loved. It's fantastic. Yeah. I knew the answer, but it was just wonderful to ask. And they're like, why would you cut this down? You know, it's the tree of life for what they're trying to do.
And can you just kind of build on that for us a little bit? Because you've talked a lot about kind of aromatics and the way different woods burn. Can you just bring that to life for us in a little bit more detail, just to illustrate perhaps some of the different woods and their characteristics and how perhaps they link with certain foodstuffs particularly well?
Some of them are so under our nose that we take them for granted. So if you buy smoked salmon in this country, here's a classic example. It's usually white American oak that they're smoked with, because that's what the whiskey barrel industry is made from. Yeah. So the wood chip is a byproduct. And where does it happen to be made? In Scotland. Yeah. So here we go. We got a local byproduct from a very big industry being used to cure a fish which is high value and a signature that I can't tell you anyone who doesn't know what oak smoked salmon will smell like.
Yeah.
However, if you navigate across the east and you go to the Baltic states, you go to Finland, smoked salmon isn't smoked with oak, it's smoked with alder.
Mm-hmm.
And alder is a tree, because there's a lot of lakes in Finland, it's a tree that survives and thrives near water and has a symbiotic relationship with a fungus. And that fungus stops the tree getting a rot setting. So the tree feeds the fungus and the fungus helps protect. So when you smell that wood, if you smell it burning, it almost smells like pear drops, fruit gums, smells like hot custard. So you get this wonderful aromatic which goes into the salmon, which is a much more fruity note than you'd ever come across.
Yeah.
The same wood is used to smoke sausages that are steamed in Poland. Mm-hmm. So across that area, alder is a very big resource because it's there. And so it's finding the purpose of a tree. And often it has, for instance, like we go back to applewood, applewood doesn't burn and smell of apples. But if you imagine when you bite an apple, that zest you get, that acidity, mm-hmm. that's relevant in the aromatic that's produced in the smoke. And it makes sense because the tree is essentially a super highway for all that nutrient and fruit juice.
Yeah.
So it becomes of itself.
Yeah.
And when you burn it, it releases some of those qualities that remind you of the qualities of what it's about. Usually a fruit tree or a nut tree will produce a sweeter smoke and a smoke that's good. Yeah. Look at beech smoked ham, Germany's, Germany's covered in beech trees. Ironically, you also get a lot of beech smoked, sort of hot dogs and sausages and hams that you recognize those notes.
So do you find that, based on that you'll have conversations with chefs around certain ingredients, is that, Thomas and his turbot as an example, is that where you're actually having a conversation about, well, I've got this ingredient, what's either the wood or the blend or whatever that we should be cooking that over? Is that a conversation that happens?
It can be. Yeah, it can be that. With someone like Thomas, you have to have a very strong case to make a presence on the plate with him. Mm-hmm. If you look on his menu, it just says turbot, grilled turbot, because that's what it is. If you're aware and you ask, you'll know why they grill it over certain things because there's a cultural reference there.
Yeah.
But then when they do their wood smoked potatoes in the oven, they use a particular blend of wood to do that because it has the notes that they're looking for. We're in a time now where we've had so much of opening up that library of aromatics from wood that we've started to find wood that's never been mentioned in any form of barbecue, cuisine, anything like that. And we're starting to have some really interesting results. It's nuanced. It's a bit like nosing wine or coffee or tea.
Yeah.
Once you open up the vocabulary, it grows.
Yeah.
And so you're looking for these elements which live underneath, and live around those aromatics. So we're burning a wood at the moment called hornbeam, and hornbeam is a very unique wood in that it's the hardest wood on the UK in the British Isles. So the hardest in a Dewar value, the strength of it. It's very white and it's very clean, and it's unique in the way it grows. But it used to be a big wood that they use for making charcoal. Because it's so hard and dense, it used to make a great charcoal, but the charcoal was made for smithing. So we started to use it because when you burn it in an oven, it burns like coal. Mm-hmm. It burns like a mineral coal. It burns for such a long time. Out of it, when it's kiln dried, and this is the key bit, if you get it dried correctly and you dry off all the moisture in the right way and you're left with the lovely freshness of the biomass that it is, there is some really interesting signatures in it. And it's got a real earthiness to it and it's a very grounding sort of effect. So what I've started to do is blend that with, say, some of that and some applewood.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of getting this earthier note with a sharper zest.
Yeah.
And that provides chefs with a much longer burn value, because there's an economy here. You know, I think we did go through that quite a macho stage where people were building these like 10-foot fire pits that looked amazing, and that things hang upside down and everything, and hang on racks and rails, and that is really great. But you also realize it takes a huge amount of fuel.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm seeing a direction towards a more refined grill and maybe a wood oven as a complement.
Yeah.
And that way you can, and I'm seeing people running wood ovens once they're up to speed, and then running them down a bit lower. And instead of, you know, a wood oven isn't just a pizza oven, it's an oven.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that crossover where I'm seeing a wing rib of beef going in a wood oven first,
yeah,
and then being rested over a grill fire.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that slight shift in kit where it's becoming pretty much simplified as well, so that the products you're burning you can be more economical with, because you need to be, because it's not cheap, you know, and it's a bulky product to move. So
of course.
Yeah, so finding things and bringing them to the market that haven't previously been considered as classic ingredients that's exciting. I'm enjoying that.
I'm sure. And as we've started in our more recent food culture to give vegetables and plants a greater presence on our menus and on our plates, have you seen that kind of request or demand from industry come through, that again, different woods, different burn rates and so on when it comes to, you know, putting greens or lettuce or cauliflower or whatever on the grill?
But if you go back, I mean, looking at books, I've got a pile of books here, and I was thinking, you know, what was the sort of kernel of the ideas for people when Francis Malman wrote Seven Fires, which was, I looked at it recently. He did it with Peter Kaminsky, and you know, Peter did a huge amount of work on this. Seven Fires is written in 2009, I think, or maybe 2011. That book was just, there wasn't anything else out there. You know, there wasn't any. But when you read that book now, you look at it, and it's like there's a huge amount on vegetable cooking. You know.
Yeah.
And that's 2009. That book. So that's 11 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my signed copy. People, that was a real inspiration, because it stopped people looking at cooking on fire as barbecue.
Yeah.
And I've always been very reluctant to mention that word. It's only this year I've been much more free and accepting of the whole sort of barbecue thing, because I think it got blinded by American barbecue culture, and there's so much more to barbecue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think Malman's book, people like Nicholas Ekstedt in Stockholm, the way he treats vegetables was just, some of the techniques now, when you look, at the time looked so revolutionary, putting a whole celeriac in the fire and just bringing out this black cannonball that was smoking. And it was like, nobody would have thought that was edible, you know. And that you know, he burns artichokes until they look like they're just about to be binned, and they, you know, once they're peeled, they're amazing. And I think that has been an inspiration that has probably got more traction now, even though it's been sitting there for a long time. And Nicholas uses the silver birch, and there's a very distinctive smell of silver birch. Yeah. If you've burnt it yourself, or you've been to Scandinavia in the winter, it's what the countryside smells of. It's I suppose, I tend to find that wine tasting notes are quite similar. So it has a sort of lemon zesty minerality and openness to the smoke. Yeah. But it has a notable spike in it, in that there's a sharp note in the eating quality that's quite high in its register. And it works really good if you take like a cabbage or something like that, which has that sort of slightly you know, sulfurous note to it. When you combine them, it pops that highness to it. Yeah. And so those are really complementary. When you start basting them with fats, which in Scandinavia they're not shy of doing.
No.
You know, there's a wonderful steak cooking method out there that they just have a butter bath, and you just dip the steak in the butter bath, grill it, dip it, grill it.
Yeah.
But what it does, the fats pick up those lovely wood notes, and they do that with vegetables. So they transfer really well. Silver birch is really, really great for that.
No, it's absolutely inspiring and fascinating to hear you kind of talk at this level about food and wood and fire together. What do you think, if we kind of look forward from your perspective, what do you see?
So what I'm seeing is, I think what's happened is that there's no going back. This is not going away. This is what cooking is about. Yeah. And it's just, I think the future, it's interesting. You know, I'm going to places and I'm watching, because I design and build grills for chefs, because there's still a disconnect between a barbecue, what people think is a barbecue, and what a chef uses, which is all these beautiful stovetops. And what I've done is I've looked at the way stovetops are built and all these qualities, like, you know, having a front rail you can drop a 16th pan into, and having all these qualities of a stovetop, but having a multifunctional piece of equipment that can cook still like a Michelin kitchen, but happens to also have the expression of fire in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going. I'm seeing restaurants like Lyle's have just refitted. They just put a brand new wood-fired oven in, a bigger version of it. More dishes are going in those ovens. There's just a texture difference. There's a integrity difference. There's a you know, and also as well, you've got to remember, you've got to hold on to your chefs now. Because there's lots of very exciting restaurants that will take your chefs on if you're not making your kitchen as exciting, you know. And I think the new frontier is a slightly different shape, and fire is definitely burning through that pathway for it.
It sounds like there's a real sophistication to it as well, both in not only in the materials that are being burnt, but also the architecture of those grills, those stoves that have got different elements to them. It's not just about naked flame, it's about a sophistication that allows you to cook different things in different ways and different temperatures to get more more dishes. We've talked about meats and plants and fish and desserts and things like that. It sounds like there's we're on the cusp of the future is just, it's more of it and a greater level of sophistication.
And so it's become part of the dialogue for aspiring chefs or chefs who are making changes in their kitchens. And for me, that's the bit I always wanted. I wanted it to go from cult to culture. That's what I would like to be able to look back and people just say, that's where it started. It went through there. Do you know what I mean? That was the other people to take it up, and
That's one of the things I was going to ask you, is that I'm really clear as me, as Charles, as the Food People. I want to be known for championing change and shifting the future of food and drink. What would your kind of sentence or strapline be as Mark Parr? What is it that you want to be remembered for?
I'm not too far off. I really wanted to challenge complacency. Yeah. And it's not like, don't be complacent and and you're a bad person. I'm just saying that let's make sure if we're making something that we try and use all of the ingredients that have gone through history, and let's bring that spark in. And imagination is like a guy in India. It took me to go all the way to India to realize. The guy in India said to me, fire is on the inside. It starts in your head. Yeah. And if I can fire the imagination, that for me that's what I'd be happy with, firing people's imagination. I want young kids to come in. It's like Westminster College last year, I think it was, put a fire grill in their pack in the college. Yeah. And for me, I just go, that is awesome. Yeah. Because it's a shift. Yeah, and it's not going backwards, and I think that's great. I smile when I go into places,
Well, I have to say, I could continue this interview way beyond this time slot. Yes. Talk to you for hours and hours, and I certainly feel truly inspired with fire in my belly having talked to you for an hour, and I'm certain that everyone that listens to this will definitely be in the same spot. So reluctantly, that concludes this episode of the Food People in Conversation with Mark. On behalf of us all at the Food People, it's a great pleasure to have you join me today. You've given us a fascinating and truly inspirational insight into your interpretation of shifting the future of food and drink. And let's take everyone on this fire cooking journey and go from cult to culture. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you, Charles.
So do join our TFP community for the details of our latest In Conversation With episodes, as well as the latest free to access food trends foresight. Visit thefoodpeople.co.uk and complete your details at the footer of the page. On behalf of Mark and myself, thanks for listening to the Food People in Conversation With. How are you shifting the future of food and drink?